stuff is $313 million. Rent and facility maintenance were the biggest of the two, and then there's some other minor stuff in there. Okay, so that's that. And now let's take a look at the profits from the 8 largest U.S. pharmaceutical companies in 2009. From Eli Lilly, 4.328 billion; Bristol Myers Squibb, 4.420 billion; Abbott Labs, 5.746 billion; AstraZeneca, 7.544 billion; Novartis, 8 blah blah blah; Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Merck. Okay, we can see all that. Now, let's grant some very generous assumptions. Let's grant that all of the stuff that the FDA spends money on is necessary. Let's not question the FDA at all. Let's assume that these 8 pharmaceutical companies would have to pay for the entire FDA budget, which is $3.18 billion, ignoring that $828 million is already paid from the companies that are to be, quote, regulated, close quote. These 8 companies would have to spend 4.9% of their profits to cover the expenses of the entire FDA. So in terms of financial burden, regulation on a free market is not a problem. You may say there's more of an incentive problem, and I would disagree, but for now we can agree that the Food and Drug Administration is not an issue in terms of companies just not having enough money to do it. They have more than enough money to do it. So that's not a problem. But this little thing is a little bit misleading, is a misleading comparison, because really there are more companies, including food companies and biotech companies, and these companies are already paying about 1/4 of the FDA's fees. But I'm not going to analyze across all industries affected by the FDA, so I'll just guess that each of these companies would really only be losing about 1% in profit. That's just an estimate, but it doesn't matter. Well, why am I talking about this? Well, a user may be watching this video and think, why is he talking about? I don't understand what relevance this has to the price of tea in China. But I'm making this video because of a comment posted by Anubis2814. He says, and this is in response to a video by Dustyfoot, which I'll link. Anubis says, unlike these companies you mentioned, the comparative amount of money needed to put their stamp on a drug versus a toaster or dishwasher is an astronomical difference. This ensures that it is hard to enter the market, and 1 or 2 companies would hold monopoly. The idea is one I've heard before. Any agency like this, as profit is their only goal, would also be just fine with just appearing to be safe as opposed to actually being safe. BP is treating this crisis as a PR problem mostly. Well, we've already debunked the first assertion, and the second assertion is just silly. I guess the less than 4.9% reduction in the profits are going to knock Eli Lilly, Bristol Myers Squibb, Abbott Labs, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer out of the market. But the second statement is really bizarre. Profit. Well, first off, Underwriters Laboratory and the American Dairy Association and Council, the companies I think Anubis is referring to, are non-profit companies. And I'm not sure what ADA stands for, but if he's talking about the American Dental Association, that's nonprofit, or the American Diabetes Association, that's nonprofit. So there's plenty of nonprofit trade associations, but unfortunately these agencies have lost their teeth once state regulation came to dominate. Although the American Diabetes Association is not a trade association, but anyway, you know what I mean. But aside from that, all individuals attempt to profit. Agents of the FDA are going to try to get the most out of doing the least. That is, FDA officials have just as much incentive to cut corners as any other agency. And they get money, and they have to spend it on performing a task. So profit and loss don't disappear just because it's a state agency. They just manifest in different ways. So fear of profit is just inane. It's just like it's like pre-understanding of economics is what a fear of profit is. Moreover, the FDA will not go out of business. So if, say, FDA agents get bribed and it is uncovered, maybe some people will get fired in a congressional hearing and all that hoopla, but the FDA will still be in business. Now, if you're the owner of a grocery store, let's say, and you hear that one of the regulatory agencies you rely on is taking bribes, would you seek out some other regulatory agency? I would. I don't want tainted products in my store. and get a reputation of selling bad stuff. And if my company was a large chain like Albertsons, Walmart, Vons, Costco, or whatever, this process would all be standardized. If the FDA is found to take bribes or cut corners somehow, it doesn't matter. You still have to get approved by them, right? And this can lead to the problem where you get your your drug on the approval track for the FDA. Then some other big companies bribe the FDA and get their same drug fast tracked. You still have to get your drug through the FDA, right? Because they're the monopoly. You have to deal with them. So even if they're corrupt, you have to deal with them. Whereas a regulatory firm on a market, if they're corrupt, you don't have to deal with them, and other players in the market will understand that, because they'll understand that the agency is crooked. So there's more choice in terms of regulatory agencies in a market, and it's not like you can't just go through Bob's regulatory garage shack or something like that. Because the whole point of the only reason you would use a regulatory agency is because of the reputation that regulatory agency has. Anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent. Then Anubis brings up the BP oil spill. Now, what actually happened is that Ken Salazar, Obama administration Secretary of Interior, granted Deepwater Horizons, which was the oil rig that failed, a categorical exclusion from inspection. And what you grant a categorical exclusion for are things like outhouses and mountain trails. But apparently Salazar thought this oil rig was so safe and so unlikely to have any environmental impact that he excluded that rig from any environmental evaluation or regulation. Now, I have a video on that, which I'll link in the description. But no, the BP disaster was a failure of government regulation, and Walter Block outlined a system of private property in oceans and how it would work better, and how the regulatory agencies would be more incentivized to not take bribes, which is what I believe happened with Ken Salazar. And I'll link that in the description as well. And then Anubis writes the comments, you do realize that the UL and the ADA are also government regulated, right? Both work so well because there is a government and civilian oversight. 2 layers of coverage is better than 1. If the drug companies wanted to, they could probably easily set up something of the same, but it would be regulated too. They just have not found it to be financially worth it. Well, first off, this contradicts what he said before. There's an astronomical difference. Now he's saying it'd be easy for them to do so. Well, I have no idea what he means by is government regulated. All companies are regulated somehow. So that's, I guess he's saying that you can't have a private company in anything because they're all regulated. What's he talking about? Because all companies are regulated by government now, that basically means you can't use that as an argument. You have to say how. Maybe are Underwriters Laboratory and the ADA, are they government funded? And if they're government funded, how so? Are they getting contracts for inspecting government appliances and stuff? And how does that? And does that mean that these firms wouldn't come into existence? Wouldn't it still exist in a completely free market? It's not. Yeah. Anyway, and this is just a YouTube comment, but anyway. And if you want 2 layers of oversight, you can have 2 different agencies. So it's more difficult to bribe one, or if one cuts corners, you still get the product properly inspected by the other company in time to find another backup company. So you don't need government to have multiple layers of coverage. And the reason there aren't third-party drug testing companies is because these companies have to comply with the FDA. That is, there already is a third party, and while it may make sense to have a third party, it doesn't make sense now that the FDA exists, right? Though pharmaceutical companies do test their products in their own labs, but they don't need to make it third party because the public already believes the FDA is a third party. That is, it makes sense that it would make sense for the drug companies to submit to a third party and pay for it full boat. But now that the FDA exists, it doesn't make sense for them to come together to form another third party, right? Because the public already believes in the FDA. Now, this is actually a very dangerous situation because the FDA is overestimated by the public, as all government agencies are. And this is something close to an analytic truth. You may think I'm just kind of pulling that out of my ass, but here's the thing. States cannot exist by force alone, which is proven by by revolutions. Thus, they are sustained by belief, which need not be gung-ho patriotism, but could just be resigned acceptance, like death and taxes. Or I'm a hard-nosed realist, and you gotta have a government, or some other inane tripe like that. Whatever. It's just belief in the state and somehow. And this belief in the either inevitability or necessity of the state is all that's needed. This means that people believe that agents of the state are, for some reason, insulated from the problems of human action, which results in them saying absurd things like, people can't do X, thus we need people, and we'll call them the state, to do X, right? Which is kind of what Anubis is saying. If it were just some private rating agency, people would be much more skeptical, which they should be with the FDA, because there's no reason to believe the FDA is any better than a private company. Let me end this by saying that I don't support a stateless society because I think products would be safer. I think they would be about as safe as they are today. I support a stateless society for other reasons. This stuff on regulation, this is purely defensive and addressing concerns. I'm just saying that regulation is not a difficult task and could easily be done without a state as long as consumers demanded it. And since the FDA itself is an indirect outgrowth of consumer demand, the notion that some hopefully more efficient non-state agency wouldn't replace the FDA is viscerally absurd.